In this video, we are going to be discussing adopting a personal Bitcoin standard, using Bitcoin as a unit of account against which to measure your net worth, and the sobering truth about doing so. You might think that by adopting a Bitcoin standard and denominating your wealth in Bitcoin, that you will feel more wealthy. It is the opposite. And that's why I say this is the sobering truth. Now let's unpack all this. We are going to start by looking at a chart that measures my personal net worth denominated in fiat going back to around the beginning of March 2020. And the reason why we can't go further back than this is because this particular app, I only started using it then, and it is the only one I have that allows me to switch between denominating in fiat and Bitcoin. I have records that go further back than that, much further. Unfortunately, with that app, I cannot denominate in Bitcoin. So you're going to have to just... I wish there was a larger sample size here, but we're going to have to work with this. Let's examine this net worth graph. Bitcoin is my largest asset on my balance sheet. And as you can see, my net worth has been increasing, which makes sense going back to the beginning of 2020 when Bitcoin was maybe $10,000. Obviously it's a lot more than that, so my net worth has gone up. Just a couple notes I would like to point out. If you look in around March 2020, you'll see that little dip. That was one of the largest Bitcoin crashes in its history, but it barely registers on this graph. And that's because as Bitcoin goes exponential, the crashes in the past become so insignificant. They become just washed out. They become little blips on the graph, and that is why I am not afraid of when Bitcoin crashes against fiat. In fact, that's when I back the truck up and start just shoveling in the sats. Just as an aside, the two best financial moves I've ever made in my life were basically in 2018, December 2018, there was a significant Bitcoin crash, and I heavily accumulated during that crash. In March of 2020, there was a significant Bitcoin crash, and I heavily accumulated. And just from taking advantage of the extreme fear and the extreme volatility present in these two Bitcoin crashes, I essentially accumulated the bulk of my Bitcoin. I still dollar cost average, but it is taking advantage of these two opportunities that were critical to accumulating the Bitcoin that I do have. So let's just look at the graph here. It's going up. It looks it's looking pretty good. You can see in the summer of this year that there was another crash, and that registers since Bitcoin is my my largest asset. You can see that it did have an effect. This downward trend during the summer of this year, where my net worth is declining because Bitcoin is crashing against fiat, that dip is going to look like the dip in March of 2020. that you see on the chart in the future. It won't even register. It'll look like just a little squiggle, a little dip on the graph. So just remember that. So things are looking pretty good for my net worth overall. There's an upward trend. You know, that's a pretty good looking chart denominated in fiat. Now, let us switch the chart and denominate my net worth in Bitcoin, and let's see what the chart looks like. Well, that's interesting, isn't it? This is the exact same scale, the exact same data. The only thing that's different is it is denominated in Bitcoin, not in fiat. Why is my net worth denominated in Bitcoin trending down, whereas the fiat chart, it is trending up? This is the sobering truth about adopting a personal Bitcoin standard and using Bitcoin to denominate your wealth and your net worth. This is what it looks like. Now, this chart is a lot more. This is not an exciting chart. This is not the graph of a net worth, where if this is your net worth, you wouldn't just assume that you can keep on doing whatever you're doing. If this is your net worth, you look at this chart and you say, I need to make changes. I need to make decisions with my wealth that get this chart trending in the right direction. And that's the paradox here, isn't it? Is that when you look at the net worth chart denominated in fiat, it looks like everything's going swimmingly. But in this one, the immediate reaction is, oh, whoever's net worth this is, they need to save more, because their net worth is declining. They need to do something to save more. Now, let's give this chart a little more context and help to unpack why it looks the way it does. This graph shows all of my assets going back on the same time scale, going back to early 2020, and it shows the total gain or loss of that asset, but crucially denominated in Bitcoin. So you can see at the top, Bitcoin being my greatest asset as a percentage of my net worth is it doesn't have a gain or loss because it's measuring against itself, right? So Bitcoin just is. However much Bitcoin I have, the return on it, because it's measuring itself, is basically zero. But then you see my next largest asset, and I'm not going to reveal any personal info here. I'm not revealing the scales, because the scale of the net worth doesn't matter. Your net worth could be $10,000 and all of these principles still apply. Or you could be looking at MicroStrategy's balance sheet. This exact same exercise would apply. The scale doesn't matter. But if you look at my second largest asset, it has lost 76% since going back to 2020. And then we have my third largest asset, an 82% loss. And look at the bottom. We have a 93% loss. What is going on here? What have I invested in that is crashing so horribly? Are these penny stocks? What is going on here? Well, here's the answer. When you are denominating in Bitcoin and you are in the middle of the greatest transfer of wealth in human history, from a legacy financial system that is collapsing in slow motion, and when that wealth is transferring to Bitcoin, everything except Bitcoin essentially is just going to be, when measured against Bitcoin, just slaughtered, just annihilated, you know? Now, these are not penny stocks. This is my house, my pension, you know, fixed assets like vehicles. You see that that 9.56% down? That is a vehicle, a used car that I bought last month. In a single month, that car, and it's not an investment, but it is an asset on my balance sheet, has already lost 10% against Bitcoin. And it's going to zero, right? That's the thing about vehicles. Vehicles they go to zero. And even with assets such as a house, or there is some traditional investments there, such as with my pension or my retirement fund that I do have. These things measured against Bitcoin in just 2 years, and in that 2 years there was 2 significant Bitcoin crashes relative to fiat. And despite those 2 crashes in just, not even 2 years, everything that is not Bitcoin on my balance sheet has been annihilated. This is the sobering truth, is that to the extent that my thesis regarding Bitcoin being a conduit for transferring real wealth from a crumbling system, to the extent that that is one of the greatest transfer of wealth in human history, that is occurring in slow motion, to the extent that that thesis is correct, and I don't know that it is, but I am betting that it is, to the extent that that thesis is correct, anything that you have on your balance sheet that is not Bitcoin is going to be obliterated. And to the extent that Bitcoin perhaps represents only, let's say, 50% of your net worth, well, if we go back to the chart that depicts a net worth denominated in Bitcoin, that chart is going to be trending down. It is going to continue to trend down because everything that is not Bitcoin in your balance sheet is rapidly depreciating against Bitcoin. Or the inverse would be Bitcoin is appreciating against those assets. So this is why I think it is critical to denominate your net worth in Bitcoin. It is critical to use Bitcoin as a unit of account, because it will reveal to you how overexposed you are to the legacy financial system. So you can see why I titled this video The Sobering Truth about adopting a personal Bitcoin standard. It's not fun. It doesn't make you feel rich. It makes you feel like you are falling behind. It makes you feel like you are behind the curve, because your net worth against Bitcoin, measured over periods, not even a period of a decade, just even 2 years, just even the 2 years that included 2 major Bitcoin crashes, and my net worth, and I'm someone who the largest asset on my balance sheet is Bitcoin, and yet because I have a house, because I still have a pension, because I have fixed assets and some traditional assets, because I still have these, my my net worth is still just being wrecked against Bitcoin. And really the only solution to get that chart going in the right direction in the long term is to simply stack more Bitcoin. Now, one of the interesting dynamics at play here is that, and this is kind of paradoxical, but if and when Bitcoin denominated in fiat, measured against fiat, crashes, that on the chart, my net worth goes up. And in the short term, that is because all assets denominated in fiat and measured against Bitcoin are going up relative to Bitcoin. Bitcoin is depreciating against those assets. And to the extent that I have assets that are not Bitcoin on my balance sheet, they will go up. And in that chart actually will show an increase in my my total net worth measured against Bitcoin. How does that make any sense? Well, it's because the other assets on my balance sheet now can buy more Bitcoin. And this is critical to understand, because if there is a crash in Bitcoin's price, that provides you an opportunity to buy more Bitcoin, to increase your exposure to Bitcoin on your balance sheet by trading some of your some of the assets that are appreciating relative to Bitcoin, whether it be cash or stocks or any other liquid asset that you can easily convert into Bitcoin. Now that's critical, because when you're looking at your net worth on a chart like this denominated in Bitcoin and it goes up, that is actually a signal that there is an opportunity to buy Bitcoin. That even though Bitcoin is crashing and your net worth is going up measured in Bitcoin, it is not a signal that you can just sit around and let that trend continue. It is a signal that this is an opportunity to expand your exposure to Bitcoin. It's not a sign that you can just keep doing what you're doing. This is the paradox of it. Another way to contextualize this chart into comprehensible terms is to imagine your Bitcoin, or sorry, to imagine that your only asset was Bitcoin and you owned nothing else. Your balance sheet was 100% Bitcoin. What would the chart look like? It would be perfectly flat, perfectly straight, unchanging, because it is denominated in itself and there is no volatility even to measure or to graph. The only way in this case that your net worth would change would be if A, you accumulate more Bitcoin, you stack, which would increase your net worth, or if you decided to spend some, and then it would just go down because now you have less units of the Bitcoin. The only way that this chart that displays volatility occurs is if you are exposed to a mix of assets, including Bitcoin. In that case, or even if you have no Bitcoin, in that case, what you're going to see, volatility measured against Bitcoin. To the extent that my net worth denominated in Bitcoin is going down is the extent to which Bitcoin is appreciating in value relative to every other asset in the world. And the only way to stop that downward trend is essentially to just accumulate more Bitcoin, to increase Bitcoin as the largest asset on your balance sheet. Now, I suppose I should conclude here by emphasizing that none of this really makes sense unless you buy into the central thesis that I am operating from, that there is a once in a lifetime, once in an epoch level of opportunity, in the sense that there is a transfer of wealth from the legacy fiat central bank fractional reserve system. There is a transfer of wealth that is occurring in real time from that system into Bitcoin. And yes, to an extent, we do see some of this wealth transferring into crypto in general, but there is reasons why I think that in the long run it's going to be Bitcoin that absorbs most of that wealth. We can get into some of those reasons why I am only in Bitcoin and not in any altcoins later. But this whole video, denominating your net worth in terms of sats and Bitcoin, looking at it and using that chart to assess your net worth, none of that makes sense if you don't buy into that central thesis. And to the extent that you do not buy into that central thesis, you should not have the majority of your net worth in Bitcoin. You should simply have some of your net worth in Bitcoin simply as a hedge against being wrong about Bitcoin. Simply as a hedge, or you could say simply as a call option on Bitcoin actually succeeding. Because if you don't buy into that thesis that I described concerning Bitcoin, if you think that that is not going to play out and you are wrong, your net worth is going to be denominated in Bitcoin whether or not you like it. And guess what? Your net worth, when you look at it on a graph 10 years from now, 15, 20 years from now, maybe at the end of your life, it is going to look like it fell off a cliff. Because you were too exposed to the legacy financial system, and you did not hold enough of a percentage exposure to Bitcoin. You should, in that sense, at the very least, hold some Bitcoin as a hedge. If you are like me and you suspect, you have a strong conviction that the thesis that I have described concerning Bitcoin is correct, then it really is a matter of just maximizing my exposure to Bitcoin in order to limit the bleeding that is occurring in everything that I own that is not Bitcoin, as it rapidly depreciates against Bitcoin. Now, you could say, why don't I just sell everything I own and put it all into Bitcoin? Well, some of these things I cannot sell. I cannot sell my pension. I cannot sell my car. I choose not to sell my house for certain reasons that do not have to do with finances. I'm willing to make that trade-off when it comes to my house. But yes, to the extent that I buy into my central thesis regarding Bitcoin, to the extent that I continue to measure my net worth in sats and in Bitcoin, I am going to continue to accumulate more Bitcoin so as to ensure that in the long run I can get that chart stabilized. In the long run I can stop the depreciation of my own net worth relative to Bitcoin simply by exposing myself to that asset. So that's the sobering truth about adopting a personal Bitcoin standard. It is not easy. It is not like winning a lottery. It is not a matter of just sitting back and watching number go up, sitting back and watching the fiat price of Bitcoin go up. Because what is happening is that Bitcoin is monetizing, and the source from which Bitcoin is extracting energy to do so is the legacy financial system, is fiat currency. To the extent that you have any assets still within that system, it is Bitcoin is extracting energy from them, and in order to be on the right side of that, you need to own the asset that energy is being transferred to, which is Bitcoin.